I was kicked out of the house on a cold October afternoon as the rain poured down, like the sky itself wanted to rip me apart. The pregnancy test stick still trembled in my hand, but not as much as my mother's eyes when she saw the 2 red lines. The kitchen, where I used to eat breakfast every morning, suddenly turned into a courtroom, and I was the criminal awaiting judgment. "You're going to ruin your life." My mom's voice was sharp as a knife, cutting through every defense I tried to build. I had expected yelling, maybe blame, but I had never imagined being cut off forever. "My name is Lily. I'm 23, a senior in the pharmacy program at a university in Texas. All through my teenage years, I was the model child, smart, obedient, never once let my parents down. But all of it collapsed in under 3 minutes. From the moment I opened my bag, pulled out the test, and stammered, I'm pregnant." My mom froze. Her eyes, always filled with pride when she boasted about my academic achievements to the neighbors, now looked at me like I was a stain on a pristine white sheet. "Who is it? Who's the guy?" she growled, each word breaking the air like shrapnel. I lowered my head. I knew she'd ask, but I wasn't prepared for the cruelty of the next question. "Or do you not even know who the father is?" I lifted my head, unable to hide the pain. "Don't say that. I know who he is, but he won't be here." He left. My dad, who had been silent the whole time, suddenly slammed his hand on the table, coffee spilling over the rim. "You're planning to be a single mom while you haven't even finished school? You think this is some kind of game?" I instinctively held my belly, still flat under the thin sweater. I didn't know where I found the courage, but my voice didn't shake. "I'm keeping the baby. I'm not giving it up." The silence that followed was so terrifying. I thought I'd just extinguished every hope I had. "That's not happening," my mom said coldly. "If you insist on keeping this mistake, then you need to leave. I don't have a daughter who throws away her future like that. You're forcing me to give up my own child." I stepped back, my voice cracking. "No." My dad stood up, eyes filled with fury. "You chose. You're choosing that nobody over this family." I froze. My parents, the same people who stayed up all night caring for me when I was sick, who held my hand through every math problem, who once said, "No matter what happens, you'll always have us," were now standing in front of me, throwing me out of the home I grew up in. No tears, no final hug, just harsh silence as I walked upstairs, stuffed a few clothes into my backpack, grabbed my nearly dead phone and my worn-out student ID. It was still raining when I stepped outside. I turned to look at the door one last time. No one stood there. No one even cared to look. The night bus arrived right on time. I got on, sat in a corner, and placed my hand on my stomach. The journey ahead had no clear route, but at least I wasn't traveling alone anymore. I don't know how long I cried on that bus as it rolled through the cold, wet streets of Dallas. I just remember that by the time I got off, my eyes were swollen, my hands numb from gripping the backpack too tight, and the area beneath my sweater started to ache in a strange, unfamiliar way. I had nowhere to go, no one to call, except one person. "Emma, do you remember me?" I said into the phone, my voice raspy like sandpaper. "I don't have anywhere to stay tonight. I'm pregnant." Less than 15 minutes later, Emma's beat-up minivan pulled up by the curb, headlights cutting through the pitch-black night like a ray of hope. She jumped out of the car and wrapped me in a hug that made me break down in sobs. "Lily, oh my God, get in. You're shaking like a leaf." Emma had been my freshman roommate in college but dropped out halfway through after an unplanned pregnancy. Her family also cut her off. Now she lived in a low-income apartment complex on the south side of the city, working night shifts as a cashier at a nearby convenience store while raising her 2-year-old daughter, Sophie. That night, I slept on the worn-out sofa in their cramped 2-bedroom apartment. Sophie whispered, "Auntie Lily," before falling asleep in her mother's arms. And me, for the first time after a string of nightmares, I felt like I could breathe. The following weeks were brutal in every sense of the word. I applied to transfer my classes online so I could work and study at the same time. A small cafe called Maple Brew near the gas station hired me for the morning shift. 5:00 a.m. to 10:00 a.m., just enough time to come home, study, and watch Sophie while Emma worked. At night, I studied, wrote essays, and talked to my unborn child just to stay sane. Tuition? I took out more federal loans, sinking deeper into debt. Food? We split 3 packs of instant noodles between 4 people. By the 4th month, I'd learned to brew coffee with warm tap water and eat dry sandwiches without sauce. As my belly started to show, the cafe customers became less kind. Some called me irresponsible. Others asked sarcastically, "So where's the dad?" I swallowed every look of contempt like swallowing an ice cube, cold, unmelting, cutting straight to the heart. I still took ultrasound photos. I still emailed my parents with short messages, "I'm okay. My son is developing normally. Mom, please tell Dad I miss him." I never received a reply. In March, I gave birth in a public hospital after more than 26 hours of labor. Emma stayed by my side all night, her hand gripping mine like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. When that first cry rang out, my heart felt like it was being squeezed tight. I looked at the tiny, red, wrinkled baby placed on my chest, and the tears just wouldn't stop. I named him Ethan. Ethan had deep brown eyes like mine and soft, dark curls. He clung to me like he somehow knew the whole world had turned its back on us. Every morning, I left Ethan with Emma and threw myself into work. Every night, I studied with him sleeping peacefully in the crib beside my desk, his steady little breaths reminding me I couldn't give up. I kept sending photos, Ethan's first smile, Ethan learning to roll over, his first birthday just 3 cupcakes, but his eyes lit up like headlights. Not a single reply, not one missed call. The day Ethan took his first steps, I laughed so hard I cried when he reached out to grab a plastic spoon on the floor. I filmed it and sent it. The subject line of the email, "My son can walk now." A few days later, I got news that my dad had a mild heart attack. I called busy signal, called again blocked. Emma stood in the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, looking at me like she already knew. "They've made their choice. You can't pull people out of their own mess, Lily." I lowered my head. Some wounds don't bleed, but they fester like infections. That night, I held Ethan as we slept on the narrow bed by the window. Outside, Dallas was wrapped in a light fog, the streetlights blurring into soft golden dots. Ethan stirred and nestled his head into my neck. I whispered, "It's just the 2 of us, baby. But that's enough." That afternoon, I was only planning to clean out the closet to find a few summer clothes for Ethan. May had arrived in Dallas, and the tiny apartment was stiflingly hot, the ceiling fan no match for the heavy heat. I pulled out an old denim jacket I hadn't touched all winter. As I flipped the pocket before tossing it into the donation bag, my fingers brushed against a crumpled piece of paper, a lottery ticket. I'd bought it at the convenience store near Maple Brew back in December after a draining shift. I'd only bought it on a whim because of the glowing sign that read "Jackpot $47 million, and then completely forgot about it. I laughed, shook my head, and was about to throw it away. But then I saw Ethan's eyes. He was playing with blocks on the floor, those big, round eyes looking up at me, and I froze. What's the harm in checking, right? I pulled out my phone and typed in the half-faded numbers. The website loaded slowly. My heart skipped a beat. The numbers matched. Every single one, 1, 2, 5, 7, 9, 45, 60. I had to read it at least 3 times. It felt like something was squeezing my chest, not letting me breathe. Ethan crawled over curiously and placed his hand on my knee. "Mommy, are you hurt?" I couldn't answer. I could only whisper, "Ethan, call Miss Emma right now, sweetheart. Tell her to come here." Minutes later, Emma burst into the apartment, still in her night shift uniform, eyes wide with panic. "What happened? Is someone hurt?" I handed her my phone. "Emma, I think I won the lottery." She looked at the screen, then at me, then at the crumpled ticket in my hand. Lily, these numbers, it's the jackpot. I nodded. 47 million before taxes. Emma pulled me into a hug. We both cried like babies in the middle of the sweltering living room, children's toys crunching under our feet. I was shaking, not from fear, but because my mind couldn't process what was happening. An hour later, we were at the Texas lottery office. The ticket was verified. The paperwork began. After taxes, I received nearly $22 million, enough to turn mine and my son's life into something entirely different. That night, after Ethan fell asleep on the mattress I planned to replace with a real bed, the next day, I sat across from Emma under the soft yellow light of the kitchen. She took my hand. Lily, you survived and now you get to live. I nodded, still in disbelief. But I can't waste this chance. I need guidance. A financial advisor. Emma pulled out a worn business card from her wallet. James, my cousin, he's in Austin, works as a financial advisor for young entrepreneurs. Kind, discreet. You'll need someone like him. 2 days later, I had my first meeting with James in a small, quiet office inside a modern office building. He looked to be in his 30s, calm, polite, and so professional it actually helped me breathe easier. James listened as I told him everything, from the past, the baby, my parents, to the crumpled lottery ticket. He nodded, never interrupting once. Then he said, "The first thing you need to do is stay silent." Absolutely! Don't share anything with anyone except me and Emma. I nodded. I don't trust anyone else. Good. Second, I'll help you create a long-term financial plan, smart investments, and legal protection. But I need you to sign an agreement to keep everything confidential for the next 3 months. Can you do that? Yes, as long as Ethan is safe. James handed me a glass of water, his gaze steady. You have no idea, Lily. Money can change everything and everyone. You just opened a door, but behind it, there's not only light. That night, I stood by the crib, watching Ethan sleep, his tiny hands wrapped tightly around a worn stuffed bear. Inside me, a quiet storm was building. I knew the world was about to change. And I also knew some of the people who had once thrown me into a pit would soon try to crawl back, holding wine glasses and fake smiles. Because now, I was no longer the girl who got pregnant by accident. I was Lily, the single mom with $22 million in her bank account. The news of my win hit the papers 3 days later. James had tried to delay the media but couldn't stop a convenience store cashier from recognizing my face and selling the story to a local news site. The headline read, "Young single mom in Dallas wins $47 million lottery." The photo showed me standing next to Ethan. Outside the lottery center, my face a mix of exhaustion and panic. Below it were thousands of comments. Some were supportive, some congratulatory, but most were the kind that said, "Probably just had a baby for the welfare checks. Guess she actually won." I had prepared myself for everything, the media, the public, even strangers knocking on my door asking for help. But I wasn't prepared for the call from my mother. Her name lit up on my screen like a dagger from the past. 7 years. Not one text. Not one check-in. And now she calls. I looked at James. Should I answer? You want to face it? I nodded. Then answer. But don't let them flip the script and make themselves the victims. I picked up. Lily. My mother's voice trembled like she'd just finished a marathon. It's Mom. I just saw you on the news. I said nothing. She kept going, as if afraid I'd hang up if she stopped. You've grown so much. And the little boy, he looks so much like you when you were little. His name is Ethan, I replied, my voice dry. Ethan, she repeated, tasting the syllables. What a beautiful name. Your father, he saw the news too. We miss you so much. I'm sorry. I know we were wrong. Can we start over? I gave a bitter laugh. 7 years. Not a single birthday card. Not once asking if I was dead or alive. You really think one phone call is enough? Silence on the other end. Then can we meet, have dinner, just as a family? I hesitated. James shook his head slightly, but I nodded. All right. Friday night, 7:00 p.m., Braddock's Grill. That's the place you'd choose, right? Yes. You remember? Not because of memories. Because you like expensive places. I hung up before she could respond. My heart was racing, not from emotion, but from a cold clarity, slowly pulling me out of all the old wounds. Friday night, I arrived 10 minutes late on purpose. Braddock's was still the same. Sparkling wine glasses, pristine white tablecloths, waiters in tuxedos like they were on a movie set. I wore dark jeans and a turtleneck sweater, no makeup, no jewelry, no armor, just silence sharp as a blade. My parents were already seated. 2 glasses of red wine and a glass of water had been set out. Lily, my mother, stood up, reaching out her hand. I walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat down without touching her. Where's the boy? My father asked, his voice deeper than I remembered. At home with someone who actually counts as family. She pressed her lips together, her eyes twitching slightly. My father laced his fingers and said, We've thought a lot about what happened, about the mistakes on both sides. Did I make a mistake? I looked him straight in the eyes. By keeping my child? By refusing to throw away his life just to win the blind approval of my parents? No one answered. A man in a suit appeared behind them and sat down at the table without being invited. Good evening, Miss Lily. I'm Mark, the legal representative for Mr. and Mrs. Carter. They've prepared a detailed plan to rebuild the family relationship. I laughed. You brought a lawyer to a family reunion? How touching. My mother blushed. It's just to make things clear. We can set up a trust fund for Ethan and co-invest. I looked at Mark. Did they tell you they kicked me out on the street when I was 6 months pregnant? No money, no home, not even a good luck? Mark froze. I stood up. Thank you for the dinner, but I didn't come here to sign contracts. I came to see clearly. Your love is still conditional, and I'm not buying it. I turned to leave. My mother called after me. Lily, please don't be so cruel. I turned back, my gaze like ice. Cruel is letting a child grow up without knowing what his grandparents look like. I'm just being fair. That night when I got home, Ethan was sleeping soundly in Emma's arms. I stood there watching him, my hand unconsciously stroking his hair. Emma asked softly, You okay? I smiled. I'm okay because this time I expect nothing from them, and that's the most freeing feeling in the world. Ethan lowered his head. He couldn't deny it. I went on, How many times did I try to tell you? When Margaret mocked me at every family dinner, when Olivia called me a clingy shadow, when I was excluded from every important event, I waited for you to speak up. But what did you do? You told me, don't take it personally. Mom's just a little difficult. Olivia jokes like that. You chose their comfort over my truth. I didn't know it was that serious, Ethan whispered, almost to himself. You didn't know because you didn't want to know. I cut him off coldly. You were afraid that knowing would mean you'd have to take my side. And that meant standing up to your mom, your sister, the people who've always controlled your life. So you looked away and I took the hits. The doors opened. I stepped out into the quiet mezzanine hallway, where large mirrors reflected 2 people falling apart. Ethan followed, his hands trembling as if trying to hold on to something slipping away. Zoe, I'm sorry. I really am. If I had known, if I had listened to you sooner, then what? I turned and looked him in the eyes. You would have stood up for me against your mother? Said no to Olivia? Believed me instead of their sugar-coated poison? He didn't answer. His silence was the clearest answer I'd ever gotten. I love you, Ethan. I used to love you so much it blinded me. But today, I choose to love myself more. He reached out to grab me. I stepped back. Don't! Don't turn your regret into a reason to pull me back. I'm not the woman you could ignore anymore. I've learned to live without your family's approval, and, more importantly, without you. I turned and walked toward the stairs. The sound of my heels echoed sharply against the marble floor. Behind me, Ethan stood frozen, his shadow stretching long and silent, like a man guilty of a crime he could no longer deny. I didn't look back. In the days that followed, news of the wedding called off mid-ceremony spread fast through San Diego's social circles. Olivia vanished from social media for nearly 2 months. She was dropped from her close friend groups, completely shunned by the groom's side. Every plan she had for social climbing went up in smoke. Margaret had her luxury condo in Bellevue repossessed by the bank. She was forced to sell her BMW and move into a smaller rental apartment, leaving behind the upscale neighborhood she used to call the elite zone. And Ethan, he called me twice. I blocked his number after the third. I had lived in silence long enough. It was time to live in the sound of my own voice, and I chose not to listen to the words I once begged to say. 1 year later, I sat on the third-floor balcony facing the endless stretch of the Pacific Ocean, waves crashing against the white rocks below. The early sunlight cast a golden hue across the water, tinting the coffee cup in my hands. The salty air and cool breeze filled my lungs, and I felt weightless. I never imagined I'd live in Santa Barbara, a place that once felt out of reach on a nurse's salary. But now, I had a small apartment of my own, just a few minutes' walk from the beach, with a cozy workspace, a few green plants, and a life free of snide remarks, controlling hands, or judgmental eyes. I had rebuilt my life from the ashes. After Olivia's ruined wedding, I filed for divorce from Ethan within 2 weeks. No arguments, no drawn-out process. He didn't have the courage to fight, and I had nothing left to hold on to. I left everything behind except justice. I hired my own lawyer and worked quietly. Thanks to the evidence I had gathered earlier, Margaret was forced to return the money she had taken from Ethan's account under the agreement of private resolution to avoid criminal charges. Most of that money became my new beginning. I moved back to Southern California and got a job at a community clinic where people knew my name, respected my skills, and didn't see me as someone who had married above her class. There, no one asked me why I got divorced. No one knew I was once Olivia Evans's sister-in-law. They only knew me as Zoe, the dedicated nurse who brought donuts every Friday morning, who volunteered for night shifts when someone's kid had a fever. And that was enough. As for the Evans family, I didn't bother to keep up, but news always found its way to me. Just like the truth never stays buried. Margaret had her Bellevue condo repossessed after failing to make payments. Following the wedding scandal, she lost several business connections. Rumors spread that she had used her son's name for financial fraud. No one wanted to associate with a notorious, selfish mother-in-law. Eventually, she moved into a rental unit in the Inland Empire suburbs, far from cocktail parties and the spotlight she once stole from her son. And Olivia, from a social media princess with nearly 40,000 followers, she vanished in silence. Some say she tried to rebrand herself as an online relationship coach but was exposed for having no credentials. Her former circles turned their backs one by one. People no longer greeted her at social events. She became a cautionary tale among the upper class. Don't fall for appearances. Remember the Evans wedding? A former friend sent me a link to a local blog article about a girl who almost married a young millionaire, now working as a retail clerk at a fitness studio. I didn't open it. I didn't need to know how Olivia was living. And Ethan, I heard he switched companies, that he changed his number, left social media, and lived more privately. Some say he started seeing a therapist, but to me, it's background noise, like the weather forecast in another state. I don't hate him, but I don't love him anymore either. I mourn for the girl I was, the one who loved him so much she gave up her self-respect just to be accepted. But I don't mourn the marriage, because without it, I wouldn't have learned how to stand up on my own, wouldn't have discovered the strength I once underestimated. That morning, after finishing my coffee, I went for a walk along the beach. My bare feet sank gently into the sand, the cool seawater lapping at my ankles. I took a deep breath, letting the breeze play through my hair. No one here knew I was once labeled the housekeeper at my sister-in-law's wedding. No one looked at me with judgment or pity. I was Zoe, the woman who had walked through hell and chose not to carry the ashes with her. The launch of Breaking Cycles Foundation was held on a rare, clear Saturday morning in mid-September. The small community center in West Dallas, once an old warehouse, had been renovated using our seed funding. It was now adorned with wildflowers and banners bearing the foundation's name, simple but powerful. Local media showed up, 3 TV stations, several nonprofits, potential donors, and the single mothers we had quietly supported over the past 2 months. I wore a white blouse and cream slacks, no jewelry except for a glittery, purple, star-shaped hair clip Ethan gave me on my birthday, a plastic toy, totally mismatched with the outfit, but it was my symbol, simple, sincere, and unhidden. Emma stood next to me, gripping her speech notes tightly. She was nervous. Strangely, I felt completely calm. My parents arrived on time. Of course they did. They were always punctual for anything involving cameras. My mother wore a Chanel dress and flawless makeup. My father's leather shoes were polished to a mirror shine. Mark, the lawyer, followed behind, clutching his usual thick folder. I greeted them with a handshake, my smile polite enough not to be called rude, but cold enough to chill the air around us. Welcome to the launch of the only thing in my life I'm truly proud of. My mother smiled sweetly. We're very proud of you too, Lily. I didn't reply. Moments later, the center's director stepped up to the microphone and clapped his hands. Please give a warm round of applause for the founder of Breaking Cycles Foundation, Dr. Lily Carter. Applause erupted, cameras flashing nonstop. I stepped onto the small stage. My heart wasn't racing. My hands didn't shake. There was only one thing, the truth, and it was waiting to be set free. I took a deep breath and looked straight into the crowd. 7 years ago, I was kicked out of my home. I was 6 months pregnant, called a burden, a failure, a traitor to the family's ideals, all because I chose to keep my child. The room fell silent. I used to think I deserved it, but I was wrong. The people who abandoned me were the ones unworthy. Today, I'm not standing here as a doctor or a lottery winner. I'm standing here as a single mother. And in that role, I founded the Breaking Cycles Foundation to end the stigma, the abandonment, and the silent violence that millions of single mothers endure every day. The applause thundered through the hall. I saw my mother's face tighten, my father sit up straight, clearly no longer comfortable. I continued, I know my parents are sitting out there, the people who never sent a birthday card to their grandson, the ones who brought a lawyer to every meeting. And today, I invited them not to reconcile, but so they could witness that I don't need them to succeed. The air thickened. Cameras zoomed in on my parents. My mother forced a smile. My father whispered something to Mark. I set the mic down and walked off the stage to roaring applause. Just as I reached the reception area, my father stepped in front of me, his voice low and tense. What the hell was that, Lily? Are you trying to disgrace your family in front of the media? I'm telling the truth. If it shames you, maybe you should ask yourself why. Mark jumped in, trying to sound neutral. Lily, maybe we should talk privately. There are some things we should align on to manage public reaction. Manage? I cut him off, voice steady. Do you think I'm a company whose shares you can negotiate? Lily, my mother interjected, her voice louder than usual. You're destroying everything. You're pushing your parents away. No, you were never in the center. I'm just showing the world what you did first turn your backs. My father's face turned red. You ungrateful child. You'll regret this. I signaled to security. Please escort them off the premises. If they don't cooperate, call the police. The guards stepped in. My mother protested, eyes brimming with tears. Doing this in front of everyone? How heartless? No. Heartless was abandoning your daughter when she needed you most. What I'm doing now is fair. They were escorted out. Cameras followed closely. I didn't shy away because, for the first time in my life, I wasn't ashamed of who I was. I was proud. Emma rushed up and hugged me tightly. You just redefined what it means to flip the script, Lily. I smiled. And I'm not even done yet. Within 6 months of its official launch, the Breaking Cycles Foundation had supported over 170 single mothers across Texas, providing emergency housing, legal counseling, child care services, and educational scholarships for both mothers and their children. I was no longer a name whispered in the shadows. I became a symbol of survival and resurrection. In the first week of January, I was featured in NBC's Woman of the Year segment. The reporter asked me, "What kept you from breaking down?" I answered without hesitation, "A child with eyes just like mine and a past bitter enough to never want to look back." The story went viral. Every day, the foundation's inbox overflowed with hundreds of letters from all over the country. Mothers pushed to the margins of society, young women downed by their families, and even those who had stayed silent but now wanted to speak up. I couldn't reply to them all, but I read every word, and I cried not out of sadness, but because I finally understood. My pain wasn't meaningless. It was becoming shelter for others. I thought my parents would take the hint and step back, but no, they were like weeds. You cut them down, they grow right back. In the second week after the feature aired, I received a priority mail package. Inside was a reconciliation proposal with terms so absurd I thought it was a joke. They would publicly apologize if I agreed to hand over management of the foundation to a board of trustees they selected to ensure long-term effectiveness. I laughed and tossed the papers to the floor. Emma picked it up, eyes wide. Are they out of their minds? Do they think this is some kind of family business? I shrugged. They think money is the key to reopening family ties, but I've already changed the locks. 2 weeks later, I received a voicemail from my mother. Her voice was thick with emotion, like she was starring in a soap opera. "Lily, your father is sick. He's very sad. We can't go on like this. No matter what, we're still a family." I didn't reply because I knew they weren't hurting because they lost me. They were hurting because they lost control. 3 days later, I saw their names on the guest list for a social investment conference where I was the keynote speaker. They still couldn't resist a room with cameras and someone with a name. This time, I came prepared. I stepped onto the stage, the spotlight hitting my face. Down below, I saw my mother in the third row, wearing a pastel silk dress, her face blank. My father sat with arms crossed, eyes tense. "I'm not standing here today because I'm special," I began, "but because I was pushed to the bottom, and instead of drowning, I chose to rise. I chose to turn abandonment into strength. I chose to rewrite the story others tried to write for me." The applause crashed like waves. I lifted my head and looked directly at them, and I choose independence. No one controls me. No one sets conditions. No one speaks for me, except me. That evening, when I returned to the foundation's office, my assistant placed a thick envelope on my desk, a third negotiation proposal. Same old tactics. Transfer management of the foundation in exchange for a public apology and family reconciliation. I ripped it up in front of Emma. "They still don't understand the simplest thing, which is," "What?" she asked. "That I don't need them anymore." We laughed, not out of spite, but out of freedom. The next day, I posted an entry on the foundation's website with the first photo ever taken of me and Ethan in the hospital. Me still in a thin gown, hair matted with sweat, dark circles under my eyes from labor. The caption read, "I wasn't chosen by my family, but I chose myself, and that's the best decision I've ever made." Ethan is now 6. He can write his name, ride a bike, and loves to tell people, "My mom used to be a superhero who won the lottery and saved the world." I never correct him because, to me, he's not wrong. My parents, they're still somewhere out there, probably trying to rewrite the story in a way that makes them look better. But I no longer care because I've already won, not with money, but with truth. And I don't need anyone behind me to validate my worth. I am Lily, single mother, survivor, builder, and no one gets to rewrite this chapter but me. The new house sits at the corner of a quiet street in West Dallas, not far from the community center but far enough that I can hear the wind rustling through the maple trees each afternoon. Red tiled roof, a backyard big enough for a swing and a small wooden climbing frame for the kids. Not fancy, not luxurious, but it's mine. The kind of home I once thought I'd never have 7 years ago. Ethan, now almost 7, ran circles around the brand new kitchen, clutching his box of Legos like it was treasure. "Mom, I get to pick any room I want, as long as you clean it yourself," I answered, placing a box of spices on the shelf. The house has 4 bedrooms. One for me, one for Ethan, one for an office, and one for special guests, single mothers in transition who haven't found stable housing yet. This isn't just a home. It's a temporary refuge for those the world forgets. Emma and her daughter Sophie were the first to move in. They helped me repaint the walls, plant flowers by the door, and build a big dining table in the center of the house. After them came Clara and her son, who had lived in a car for 3 months before breaking cycle stepped in. Now Clara has a stable job and is taking evening accounting classes. "Lily," Clara said, paintbrush in hand as she spread yellow across the living room wall, "I never thought I'd ever call a place home again." "Thank you." I just smiled. "Thank you for not giving up. And this place, it belongs to all of us." The housewarming party was simple, held on a Saturday afternoon, no scented candles, no champagne, just pizza, homemade lemonade, a few cheap balloons, and lots of laughter. Walker, Ethan's best friend, dragged his mom along, carrying a tray of chocolate chip cookies. Rebecca, a single mother who had survived an abusive marriage, showed up early and rolled up her sleeves to help me prep the food. The house was full of people, yet no one felt out of place. Each person carried a scar. Each had once been backed into a corner, and now none of us were alone anymore. As the sunset painted the backyard orange, I sat on the swing with Ethan in my lap. He nestled into my chest, still holding a half-eaten slice of pizza. "Mom?" Ethan asked softly. "Is Grandma coming?" I looked down into those big, dark eyes and took a slow breath. "No, sweetheart, they're not coming." "Why not?" "Because sometimes people only want to be close to you when they think you have something they can gain from. But real family doesn't work like that." Ethan thought for a moment, then nodded. "Then I think we already have a real family." I hugged him tight, feeling his tiny heartbeat thumping against my chest. I didn't need the world's approval. I only needed this moment where I knew I had been right not to break. The following week, I was invited to speak at a national conference on modern families and the post-traditional society. Part of me found it ironic because it was that very tradition that once tried to silence me completely. I stood before hundreds of eyes, most of them belonging to people who either didn't understand or had never experienced what we'd been through. But I wasn't nervous. "I don't have a traditional family," I began. "My parents didn't take me to school. They weren't there when I gave birth. They've never once asked if their grandson is okay. But I have a community. I have a friend who held me through a rainy night. I have other mothers who rebuilt their lives with me from the ashes. And I have a little boy who every morning calls me Mom in a sleepy voice full of trust. So today I want to say this to all of you. Sometimes family isn't where you're born. It's where you're chosen, where love doesn't come from blood, but from loyalty, from standing beside someone when no one else does." When I returned from the conference, I found another envelope in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a photo of me as a little girl, sitting with my mom on a picnic in Austin. On the back it read, "I didn't know how to love you the right way, but I hope you find a way to love Ethan right." I'm sorry, I didn't cry. I just placed the photo on the bookshelf in the living room, next to a picture of Ethan grinning ear to ear while climbing a tree for the first time. I didn't need them to come back. I didn't need the past to be rewritten because I now had something the past could never give me. A chosen future, a family built from choice, not obligation. That night, the house was quiet. Moonlight spilled silver across the wooden floor. I stood at the doorway, looking out at the backyard where the kids had left their sandals and a rain-soaked teddy bear. Emma came to stand beside me holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa. "Your house is pretty full these days." "Yeah," I smiled, and none of them had to ask permission to stay. I took a deep breath. No more fear. No more pain. Only the peace of someone who had weathered the storm and finally understood you don't need shared blood to be loved. Family isn't where you're born. Family is where you're allowed to be yourself. And I, Lily, have found that family on my own terms. Lily's story isn't just a journey of overcoming abandonment. It's a powerful reminder that family doesn't have to be where we're born. It can be where we are loved unconditionally. From a single mother left out on the street, she rose to become a symbol of hope, inspiring hundreds of other women. Lily proved that sometimes the best things in life come from our own choices. When we have the courage to let go of the old and build a new future filled with honesty, purpose, and heart. What do you think about Lily's journey? Do biological families always deserve forgiveness? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt and thought-provoking stories about family and resilience.